should have done all straightened out. Didn't have all straightened out. Thanks, Captain. Since fundamentally... Thank you, Doctor. Since fundamentally we are interested, my particular assignment, let me put it that way, at this Congress is to discuss the significance, meaningfulness, and use of the quantitative measurements we make. I'd like to recommend a book to you. This is background reading. There's a book out called Optical Aids for Low Acuity. This is put out by Russell L. Stimson of Los Angeles. It literally is a foolproof mechanical method of knowing precisely what lens power you need for subnormal vision aids. And there's no, no way my handing to you the methods of testing, the tables. All you've got to do is get the measurement, go back to the table, figure it out, and you got your prescription written. Literally. It is a monumental work. I recommend it to you. And so I'll tell you where to get it. Anybody who's going to buy this book already has it down in his notebook so I can erase this. And anybody that doesn't buy that book by Herrick is cheating himself. I'll make it that strong. Optical Aids for Low Acuity by and from Russell L. Stimson, at 1500 South Pope Street, I don't know whether Dr. Barstow has put this in his bulletin or not yet. I'm quite sure he will. Los Angeles 15, and that town's in California. This is another one of those necessary, vital aspects of optometric practice that we have to have for our people and our patients, but which is a part of that corpus of optometry which is essentially opticianry. Opticianry is a part within the corpus of optometry, but is not optometry. And just like the physician can smilingly dish out castor oil and aspirin, as anybody else can do it, it is within the corpus of his profession, but that is not the practice of medicine. Now, yesterday, in talking significance of the findings we met, I covered one area of enforced alteration of input. So I haven't bored you people here with a model of vision with which we're working. But let me make a point with you, just as one of these preparatory realizations. I said to Dr. Barstow back when he sat back there in the audience that first session that I wanted to put a notion in his mind that vision is a closed energy sequence in an open energy system. Now, let me point out what I mean by that. I'm an open energy system. I put food in here and I get rid of it through my skin, through my elementary, as they say in Canada, and all of the methods of excretion. That is an open energy system. Just like you put water in a pipe in a reservoir and take it out of a faucet. But in this open energy system of mine is a closed energy sequence. And that closed energy sequence in its absolutely not even skeletonized simplification, is this. You have an area of the human body that is susceptible to excitation by an energy we call radiant energy. A section of the human body. This section of the human body being a specialized form of protoplasm that will respond to this in a selective way, set up a ionic volley, just a series of on and off impulses to go back into it. This sets up an activity through the entire body, but for the moment we will talk about as though it went this way only. It sets up a movement throughout the brain and all that goes with it, and notably sets up a final common motor pathway, which means that all these things that it does all over it that finally funnel down into this particular activity, which is what they call the final motor pathway. And that is the output of vision. And then, of course, you have, and I needn't discuss it there, the confirmatory feedback. Look, here is input. Here is output. And when I put a lens out in front of this specialized area of the human body, I enforce a change in input. And so if I do that, then I can make quantitative measurement of the response he makes, because every measurement you make is a measurement of output. There is no way for anybody to measure input. What happens from here, retina, to here is not measured. You measure output. And so when I want to find out what this altered radiant energy does to bring about a response within this organism, I put a lens and see how much lens I can put to how much tolerance he has to a changed input. And that's what we did yesterday. We talked about static retinoscope, dynamic retinoscope, cross-cylinder finding, and subjective, and notice my order in which I listed. Now, period. We have the unique, in the visual mechanism. Now, I use the word mechanism deliberately now. In the visual mechanism, we have that unique condition which exists only in the visual mechanism, what is known as, and we have called and labeled, the dual effector system. Now, do you realize that word dual effector is a much better term physiologically than the term dual output system? It is an effector system. The organism is doing something. It isn't, may I say, it is an action term. Now then, we have been considering what we can do in the way of measurement when we enforce a change that primarily is operated through the visceral system and a response through a primary visceral system. Let's consider what we do when we make another kind of an enforced alteration. I gave you a definition the other day of centering. I did it deliberately, because unless and until we begin to understand that the primary function of the growing person, if he's going to operate as a member of the genus Homo in the kind of the world around him in which he must live, he must build a computing system that lets him take into himself these changes in energy from when he looks at a distant wall and when he looks at this thing here, and compute the relationship between all these objects in space and what he must do about them. One of your committee chairmen came to me quite glowing and told me his pleasure in seeing one of his colleagues, I quote him, learn how to take a number 9 finding. You heard last night, those of you who were present heard Dr. Sutton tell how this analytical examination evolved and how we came to numbers. Why we built numbers for it, or used them. We didn't build them because there was no common tongue. Everybody called findings by different names and who couldn't communicate. And so we could set out a series of labels. And one of those labels is number 9 point. Let's stop and consider what do we do when you take a number 9 point. Now I can teach you to take a number 9 point very easily. I can teach that bellhop operator to take it. But what you must do when you say to this patient, would you tell me when you first get a blur, when that first slight blur comes, that first slight blur you saw, when you first begin to get that first, that's the mechanics. You realize what you're causing him to do. You have a target out there. It is a contour pattern. You have an organism that has learned to take this light distribution that comes from that contour pattern, set up a message that is merely an ionic volley that is not a replication of that contour pattern. And then in him, because he's integrated that with other sense modalities, it means that this is a contour pattern that he associates through all this memory situation, ultimately with the word E, and then ultimately with other things. And then you start doing this to him. The relationship between object and space cannot change. The energy that's coming from yonder does not change. And so we start him, because we have put a prism in front of him which bends light. I mean literally, because it changes pathway. In order for him to keep in alignment, in order that he may keep in alignment, he must move on. Because bear in mind always, when you think about how this mechanism operates, that this beautiful retina of yours is set up in anatomical quadrants. It is a sighting device. Literally. It is the same sort of sighting device that they run by the radar uses. It's the same sort of sighting device that an automatic pilot uses. It's the same sort of sighting device that an automatic gun turret uses. Because when the moving plane is here, the automatic gun sighting mechanism is in quadrants. And the energy distribution must be kept the same on those quadrants. And when the energy distribution is the same, that gun can hit that plane. And you have exactly the same kind of mechanism, except you use neural impulses and they use electrical impulses. And if they overshoot, they come back by a feedback system. And if you overshoot, you come back by a feedback system too. And so we put a prism in front of him, and you're putting prism base out. And you play that prism base out, and you instruct him to see to it, he holds it until he blurs. What does he do when he blurs? The prism doesn't make any change in this input. What you are measuring, my friend, is a relationship of ranges between or within the dual effector system. A relationship of ranges. Because none of these things are point activities. Every single action or function in the human being is a matter of range. There are no points. You have a sugar range, a calcium range, a saline range in your body. And you may work within that range with almost perfect ease, although the nearer you get to the end of the range, the less effective you are. And you have a range in this thing we call center. So that when I look at Dr. Camp, or when I look at a picture on a back table, or when I look at that right arm, if you change this biochemical and biophysical activity within me for any reason, if I'm from the moment when I am still half asleep, my breakfast is undigested, I look forward to some dread to the idea of luncheon, I am a different biochemical and biophysical entity than I was when I was sleeping so beautifully and soundly just before they did this. And again, it will be a different biochemical and biophysical entity at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Will you go back and remember the sightless man with me? When with no input whatsoever, we got a change in retinoscope finding. You know, somehow or other, I think we are optometrists. And by the way, I suggested something to Barstow. One of the things I remember so much about Dr. Barstow when he first came to be with us and associate with us was the fact that he taught his people in class to vocalize certain phrases and sentences. And I suggested that he take all his groups, and I think I shall do it in my seminar, and ask them to vocalize saying the word optometry as H. Ward Ewald does. I can't do it as beautifully as Ewald. I haven't his beautiful voice. When I do it, it's a bit theatrical. But I'm going to have my seminars do this. I'm going to have them say aloud with me, optometry. Will you do it with me this morning? I'm going to say it to you. Say it with me, will you? Optometry. That's right. That's the way you say optometry in your office when you say to the patient, we in optometry are interested in prevention. We in optometry are interested in children. You won't do that. I want you to practice because when he walked into that furniture store, he didn't quite use that tone of voice, but he had brought his range down. And so if I can teach you to say then when you say it to your patients, you won't say it in that quick way, we're an optometrist. You'll say we're an optometrist. And you'll do something to yourself semantically. The science of semantics says this. If you use a poison word, that word hate, you hurt yourself, not the person to whom you apply. If you say, I think he's, and use a derogatory term, you don't hurt him. You can't. You hurt yourself. And so if you will say in such a way that you are conveying the feeling of significance and respect to your patient, it's going to do something to you. And I think I shall from now on have a vocalized. Will you say it with me once more? Right. Now, when you go back, I think we in optometry should write somewhere in our offices. I mean, print it. If you know Barstow's beautiful print, we can do it. Print somewhere. I wish you wouldn't do it typewritten. I wish you in your own handwriting. The sightless man with no input changed retinoscope finding. The sightless man with no input changed retinoscope finding. Do you realize if that is before you, what it's going to do to you in your understanding and your thinking? Because we changed, the only way retinoscope findings could have changed was a change in the entire biophysical and biochemical system, wasn't it? If I were a psychiatrist, I would say I had changed his whole emotional complex. You see, that would be the language of the discipline of psychiatry. I'm an optometrist. I do optometric methods. I give optometric training. I give optometric programs. I do not work in perception. That is an educational psychological term. I'm an optometrist. And so in my optometric language, I may employ the language which is common to all disciplines, which is the modern language of communication. And in the modern language of communication, I am permitted to use the standard physiological terms. They do. And so I can say that this man changes biophysically and biochemically throughout it. There was no input. Dr. Mary Jane says there was an input here, not when he was making judgments this way.
No visual input.
That's what I mean, no input from here, of course. No visual input. That's an assumption on my part. You had no input, he's dead. See? Then they won't measure anything except the action of the worms when they crawl in and crawl out. If I could sing as well as Dr. Barstow sings, I would sing that song. So, you see, in talking number 9 finding, I'm talking all findings, where you get a chance to measure an output because you make an enforced change in alignment. An enforced change in alignment. And so we have our, I almost wish I'd had a unit moved up here. It's kind of fun. I think I shall have the company ship units along with me for a while again, like I used to. Is your imagination equal to it? You can see the letters on the wall, fine. I want you to tell me now if you get a slight blur. Yes? It clears it? Just a slight blur, and that clears it, fine. I'd like to get that blur another way. But remember that blur, and tell me you get that same blur. When it isn't quite as clear, you get not bad when it first blurs. Tell me when it first blurs. When it gets, it does, thank you. What does that first blur mean? Visualize something in your mind's eye. See a range. Look, here's a sugar range in the human, where he can increase or decrease his sugar content and still be a good operational person. Here's a saline range in that person. Here's a calcium range in that person. And here is a centering range in that person. And so I force him to change alignment. And in changing alignment, he is forced to change centering. Because I literally am doing this to him. How far can he carry that? Only as far as he has a relationship between the range of the other system. And so now I carry him to the end of this range, as it is associated with other systems. That forces a change in this optical system. When he reaches the end of the range, he's changing this optical system, not because there's a change in input here, but because he changed the whole biophysical and biochemical makeup as the sightless man did. Except the sightless man, having no input from here, could not record it for us. You having an input here can record it. And so your patient says, it's blurred. What does it mean when he says it's blurred? Here is what we call here is the conoid of Goldstrand. Along this amount of change, with the declination of this magnitude of photons, can move from this point to this point, and you still get the same acuity. And so what you've done when changing the whole biochemical and biophysical system with the forced change in alignment, you've gradually done this to this conoid system until now you've brought him to the end of a range. And he says it's slightly blurred. And so you have a measurement now of a relationship between ranges. And always remember that as long as the ranges in anything, calcium, sugar, endocrine, centering, and identification, as long as those ranges are ample, but well-defined within his operation, the greater the amplitude of the well-defined range, the better the operation in anything. And so now when you take a number 9 finding and you find you only get 5 diopter change on it, you realize that you are finding that the relationship within this ocular system of yours, wherein he needs freedom to operate, is being restricted and restrained. And you say his number 9 finding is low. And the first thing you measure is this relationship between ranges. And so you're going to say it's low. Then your next problem is, it's being low, it doesn't mean unless you have a relationship. The next thing you wonder, what are the other things that I'm going to make that'll tell me why it's low? And so in your actual technique, it's so simple. You store this up. It's slightly blurred now. Fine. Now, will you tell me, although it's blurring and continuing to blur, tell me when you see two, or it clears or moves. Any one. Just as soon as you see two, or it clears or moves. Because you see, I'm talking to you now. When he sees two, it'll mean this. Now he has carried this change on up to the point he cannot see clearly, but he can maintain enough message back here that the organism knows from its memory system that this is still a relationship where there's enough meaningfulness coming in, he can operate in his space world and maintain binocularity. When the reaching point comes when he gets such a bad light distribution here, or photon distribution here, that there's no meaningfulness at all to the organism, then he suspends the binocular relationship and gets himself work in monocular relationship, because beyond any point of a range like that, the organism operates monocular. Want to remember that, as I said to you for definite reasons the other day, that beyond a certain point in space you operate monocular anyway. The statistical evidence is very clear that beyond a certain point in space, all seeing is monocular. Your binocularity is a matter of your beautiful maintenance of a stress and counter-stress action of the human organism. When you get beyond a certain point, that stress or counter-stress is no longer necessary in your actions. Then the stress and counter-stress is of a different sort. And your binocularity grows increasingly valuable to you as an organism as you come in your space world this way. So your measurement, you're finding out now what is the complete and extreme limit of this freedom in the relationship between the dual effective system. Freedom in the relationship. Until we go from a base out to break, or it clears, because if it clears, he's done that, hasn't he? Or it moves. If it moves, he's done that, and he's seeing one object go, because you put one eye, close one eye and put a prism, the object moves, doesn't it? So you see, any one of those three answers tells you the same thing. If it doubles, or clears, or moves, the same thing is happening. Only in one instance, he's kept two eyes getting input, in the other one, he stopped getting an input, and the other one, he recognized it moved. In the long run, he'll do this. In the latter two questions, will be the same, but some people observe more easily the fact that it's cleared, and some people observe more easily the fact that it's moved. And thus, you're a never-varying question in your technique. Will you tell me when it sees two, when it doubles, or it clears, or moves? And so you never say, well, suppose he had the diplopia. You'd have covered it in your question. Suppose the guy said, well, hell, suppose he suspends. You've covered it in your question. Now, I'm particularly interested in this problem of recovery. One of the greatest advances made in optometric thinking and technique was to understand the significance of recovery findings. I think one of the revelations to a number of people in the industry was the thing that Dr. Alexander said to a man in Chicago, and thinking everybody knew it, and was amazed to find that nobody in the room except Dr. Alexander did know it. When he was originally discussing, before there was a diagrammatic interpretation of vision, when Dr. Alexander said, well, of course you realize the eyes aren't attached one to the other. There's bone between them. And when two eyes move together that way, the eyes aren't attached. Well, there's bone between them. And the man said, there is. There is. But you in optometry have studied ocular anatomy. And to you, it's so obvious. But your public hasn't. And I'll lay you a bet that 75% of the educated public have never come to realize that two eyes have no attachment one to the other. It's going between them. And as Dr. Alexander added a little bit under his breath, a lot of solid gold sometimes. Now, there is, however, an innate, and I use the word deliberately despite my detestation of it. I would say there was a gene matrix pattern. It would be my own language. But the word innate comes. Inborn, given, a movement pattern that's going to start the... You wouldn't be an operating human if you didn't have it. You are practicing certain things before you're born. And one of the things you're practicing before you're born is this matter of these eyes getting an output that'll get them into a control. So ultimately, when you're born operating, you can learn to use them as a unit. You see, you don't need them early. The fovea, the thing we talk about so much, there's no nervous connection to it until you're 16 weeks out. The proliferation of nerve to the fovea doesn't take place until long after birth. I refer you to Ida Mann's monumental work on the subject, because you primarily don't need it until a certain activity. You get along much better if you retain periphery than if you do central, which was shown to you in Dr. Franz's beautiful slide the other day. I presume you all caught it. Here's a guy who had perfectly good central vision but no periphery, and he's ruined. Here's a chap with no central vision but good periphery. He gets along all right unless you want to look at print. Do you ever stop to think about, you ever have a person led into your office, couldn't get around at all, and you sit him down in the chair and examine, you finally get a good 20/20? But the glaucoma has removed all his periphery. He can't operate, he can't see, he can't get around. But he had 20/20. Because to be for survival, the most valuable part of the visual process is periphery. Detweiler, in his book, says that the development of the fovea was a concomitant or along with in the great phylogenetic development of the development of the frontal lobe. Because you don't know whether it was the foveal development with the amount of information that forced the higher communications of the frontal lobe or the development of the frontal lobe that demanded more information. I know, but nobody knows. But there's a tremendous given endowment drive for each human being to get these two unconnected apparatus to work just as though they were tied together with steel wire. You ever realize, therefore, on that same basis, what is done to the human who abandons that deliberately and does this with one eye? Something basic has been dropped when two-eyedness is dropped as a part, again, of counter-thrust and thrust of the living, moving machine. And so when you have broken this with your prism, your base-out prisms you've gone along, and he says, oh, I see two, and then you say, are they getting further apart as I move? Yeah. All right, now tell me when they come together as one. Just as soon as they come together as one, you tell me. Just as soon as they know, thank you. Think what he's doing. When I went back and talked to Wolfgang Köhler, after we first met him at Ohio State, and I was telling him what we call I won't use the Latin term, the dread of fusion, when an individual come back together like this and will jump, and he said, impossible. The demand of the organism for fusion is so great, it would be impossible. And I said, my dear Dr. Curley, you should come and watch it. And so you're saying, how much is the drive? How much is the urge? How much is left of that bring together as one? Listen, The recovery findings are the quantitative measurement of the effectiveness of the organization of the visual process. The effectiveness of the organization of the visual process. How well is this whole complex working together? How well is the whole complex working? If an impact of difficulty, of stressfulness has come on that organism and this whole thing is in an ineffective kind of an operation, your recoveries are going to be low. If he doesn't have a visual problem, if the whole complex is undisturbed, you've got a good recovery. After he's gone through the disturbance and made what adaptation he must make, your recoveries are good again. Your recoveries are a quantitative measurement of the effectiveness of the organization of the whole visual complex. You see, when we first went back to clinical child development in Yale, we had typing, our case typing renowned. And when we first set up a situation to examine children, because they'd never done visual examinations at Yale, and when Dr. Mary Jane and I went back for their first records, which were done by Dr. Vivian Ells, here was a 4.5-year-old with a B1 type case. Never been in school. And you realize it was quite possible that our whole theory was shattered. And they asked us how we accounted for it. And for the moment, I said, well, here's these years of apparent work needing revision. Finally, we said, well, let's look at the child. You know, we found, you can imagine already, a professor's child. Mother and father both PhD. The child sitting in her father's lap and reading with him now. And had been doing so since she was 3. The marvel was that she didn't have a B2 type here instead of a B1, which she had. Then we began to look at very young children. All recoveries are low in the very young. The brakes are up in the recovery. They're all low. There's no pattern. You're based out to break it far. You're based in to break it far. You're based out to break it near. You're based in to break it all low. Because that youngster hasn't yet organized the complex. But just as soon as they begin to get up into this near 4 and 4.5, then you'll find that your recovery, if you have an intelligent child, will give you about the same picture an adult does. And all of you in this room have found that children at 4.5 will give you better responses than a 45-year-old will. But I'll tell you something about that child now. That 4.5-year-old that will give you that kind of response is already dealing in the symbolic messages of our time and already has a visual problem. Which is why Dr. Richard Appel, working with a relatively limited population he worked with back there on a high economic level, said, we never found anybody who doesn't type. Of course he hasn't. They won't. In that field. So, you see how you can lump, if you think in terms of the fact that your world is a world that operates in the near-far dimension, what we in our language using the Cartesian coordinates call the z-axis, your world is a world this way, and your base-out findings are not measurements this way. Your base-out findings are finding how much of that range he has in this way. Your base-in findings are finding how much that range he has out that way. Your recovery on your base-out is finding how well his space world is organized from a given target in towards him, and your prism base-in is telling you how far his space world is organized from a given target away from him. And so when a man says to you, I have a case where my number 10 break is good but recovery is low, and my number 11 break and recovery are low, he's saying to you that so far as he is able to maintain this range relationship here is good, organization is being disturbed in the total, and his recovery on 10 is low, but when he gets out into this area where you're finding out how much he can take out of a world that he's never used, both break and recovery are low. And you see, that's why people like Dr. George Crow and Dr. Karl Marsden and Dr. H. Ward E. Walton and that crew will say to you, the finding we watch above all other findings as indication of movement in the visual complex is the number 11 finding. I want to use the word, I have it on the tip of my tongue. It is the one finding that you take in an area of operation that the organism itself never uses. Never. The organism never changes alignment this way until you force it. And consequently, it is the most fragile. It's the one that responds. If you have your patient under lens programming, and you want to know how he is moving behind your lenses, you take your whole complex, the whole constellation of findings, all. But when you watch that number 11 finding, and if it hasn't moved, or say, let's look a little out. And then if you want to know if you're making progress with your case in your lens programming or in your visual training, you watch your whole complex of findings. But when you find your number 11 finding begin to move, you say, if it doesn't move, look a little out. Because you see, it's relatively easy to bring operation in the accustomed use in space. And that's why for so long, Dr. Alexander talked about doing orthoptics in his office. We did orthoptics in mine, in Carney. We still have tucked away somewhere the old single ocular Hazen. We have a binocular Hazen. We had a major amblyoscope. And brothers, we built duction. 60, 80, 100 doctors of duction. No good, didn't hold. And out of that we coined the phrase. It's still a good one to remember. Never do anything to a patient to bring about a change in findings. Do the things you must do to get a reorganization for his betterment in the total process, and he will change his own findings. In other words, because an individual has a low number 16B, base out to break, then I can build the base out to break on anybody and leave him just as bad as he was. But when I do things to him to cause him to reorganize his visual performance, and his number 16 finally comes up spontaneously, and so our old phrase way back yonder is the fact that you never take the red lantern away from the hole in the street. Because the red lantern in the hole in the street is your low duction. And so you start building this trick of this on him. One of the most amusing things I think I encountered from a certain top-level thinker, a top-level educator in optometry one time, is, you know, when we take a prism finding and to blur and it breaks before it blurred, we mark it X, which simply says to it, it broke before it blurred. That's what it tells us. And this man said that's a psychological trick. All I've got to do is take a person in and have them look at this thing and do certain things to them, and they'll have a blur finding again. And I said, certainly. I'm making an examination to find out what his status is now. I'm not making an examination to find out what to do after you teach him some tricks. At all. So let's go back and look at the three elements of adduction finding. Remember with me first that when you take adduction, here's what you're doing. I wish I had a plastic or glass screen. Instead I had, I'd make a mark on it. And then I'd say, here is your area in space on which you're centered. Notice my word area, I did not say plane. Here's your area and space on which you're centered. Remember the definition of centering? Centering is your knowledge of where things are precisely in relation to other things in space. Precisely. So here we are. I put a prism base in front of you. You are aligned on this area and space like this. And so I start you doing this. You can never separate centering and identification, or let me say accommodation and convergence. You never can. You can operate the range of one until it carries along with it the operable range of the other. You never can do it. There is no such thing, for instance, as monocular vision. Impossible. Your gyroscope proves it. You can have a monocular input, but there is no such thing as monocular vision. Even the blind, the one-eyed blind, if the eye is clear, will show a retinoscope change. And the gyroscope will show you that when you have an input here, you have one, the whole brain is on. You can have a monocular input. In the same way, you cannot change convergence, period. You change a relationship within a dual effector system. Now you say to me, oh, why draw these fine lines? You're just splitting hairs. I'm not. I'm not splitting hairs. If you're technicians, I will teach you how to move your hands, what the word to say, how to write the findings down, and then I'll have to have somebody else interpret them for you. If you're optometrist, then when you take these findings, this is merely your tool, and the back of your mind is investigating and figuring and thinking about what's happening in this total organism. And so when your workshops have gone on, and you yourselves are doing it, and when you get back from this Congress to your office, and your next patient walks in, if you have a working notion of the reason and significance of the findings you take, you'll go on taking it. If you haven't, then the day will come when a little pressure is on and you'll say, oh, well, I'll just skip that. I'll just skip that. My nephew, Dr. Bonebreast, and myself were riding from St. Joseph, Missouri to Kansas City. And then we got to talking about this matter, taking visual ability stuff. And Bone said, well, you know, I always take them, except, oh, you'll get a busy day and a busy Saturday and you're crowded with pigs, you don't do it. And I said, let's ask a question, Bones. Can you properly understand the visual operation of persons without a visual abilities test? He said, no. And I said, all right, let's decide on something. Either the visual ability test is essential to understanding or it's not. If it's not, don't ever do it. Don't ever do it. If it is essential, then don't let yourself get off in the thing saying, oh, well, I won't do that because I'm busy. And the proof of it, my friend, that I can show you an office that last year did 16,000 net. And the man had just a little bit more he can handle. And he stopped doing those things that he should have been doing. Stop doing the proper follow-through. Stop doing the proper progress reports. And this year, his practice off 40%, when it should have been up. Now, let's go back again on this matter of significant induction finding. When a blur is sought, when your instruction to the patient is tell me when it blurs, you are measuring the range relationship between centering identification, convergence and accommodation, whichever word you want to use, to the point when he maintained the same magnitude of contour discrimination, the same acuity. When you take him to break point, You're measuring how far he can carry this with the amount altered input, the information, where he no longer gets information adequate to him, and he lets binocularity go. When the recovery finding is taken, it is a measure of the degree of organized behavior behind it. Now, do you see something with me? If this whole interpretive complex, this whole information system is disturbed, upset, distorted, skewed because of some sort of an energy impact, I am going to be less able to keep adequate communication despite a change in light distribution in blood. And therefore my adduction is going to be low. The better the whole communication system I have of input, knowing what it means, output, and everything, the better my adduction findings are going to be. Which is the reason why your adduction findings haven't a hooting thing to do with the strength of the musculature. The adduction findings are a measurement of the magnitude of